The deadly California wildfires continue to burn across the Los Angeles area with no end in sight. The state is already working on a plan to rebuild. Tonight, MSNBC's Jen Psaki was in Altadena, California, where she spoke to Governor Gavin Newsom. They discussed the process of rebuilding, the attacks and misinformation coming from President-elect Trump, and threats by Republican lawmakers in Congress to put conditions on emergency aid.
House Speaker Mike Johnson suggested additional aid might have to come with certain conditions. Senate Majority Whip John Barrasso said he expects funding to have strings attached. Senator Tuberville even said California doesn't deserve anything, saying, quote, unless they show us they are going to make some changes. You have been here on the ground in communities for the last week. What is your reaction to the response from leaders in Washington?
Well, if that's leadership, I have a different definition. I imagine would be universally felt here. It's I'm not meeting Democrats, I'm not meeting Republicans, I'm not meeting Californians. I'm meeting American citizens desperate in need, and what they need is empathy, care, compassion, understanding. They need support, not rhetoric, not strings attached. I mean, I met families who lost not only their home, but their business and their church, their sense of self, place, community. They had a Zoom the other night, and everyone broke down crying because all they wanted to do was see the faces of one another. Mm-hmm. And yet that's the face of leadership in the state, the United States of America, conditioning aid to the American people in need, politicizing this tragic moment. So I'll spare any more commentary on it, except to say I would encourage these people. They're human beings, they're parents. I respect that. Come out here, visit with these folks. And let's have a conversation after that.
I'm more interested from you in how damaging it is when you have somebody with that type of a platform who is next week going to be the president of the United States is injecting inaccurate information about the worst wildfires in American history.
Let me answer that by thanking President of the United States, Joe Biden, who within 36 hours supported a major disaster declaration by text. Within a few minutes later, committed 100. He could have just committed 75%, 90. He said 100% of all the costs for disaster recovery. That took the time to meet with first responders, was here on the ground. I want to thank President Joe Biden. And then I want to offer that as an example to the incoming president of presidential leadership, a president of the United States of America, being here for the American citizen. He didn't ask me, is this a conservative part of California, Altadena? Did they vote for me? What, he didn't ask for his staff to look at the last election and see how many were for Kamala or how many were for Donald Trump. He said, pal, you got it. We have their backs. Express empathy. I had firefighters that went up to him and they had tears in his eyes after meeting Joe Biden, who was consoling them. I think that's an example for the incoming president. What's not, I think, helpful or beneficial is the string of consciousness, these wild-eyed fantasies that somehow the state water project, we have reservoirs that are at or near historic highs, full, completely full, that somehow there's a magical spigot in California, in Northern California, that just can be turned on and all of a sudden there will be rain or water flowing everywhere. It's not helpful. It's damaging to the very foundation of the notion of what are facts, what are truths. And the fact of that asymmetry, that's profound and consequential, amplified by people like, let's be candid, Elon Musk and others. And that 1-2 punch is real. And it's not just about this fire. As our hurricane force winds of mis and disinformation that can divide a country on a myriad of issues, this is serious. And, I get it. They want to take us. I get it. I'm not naive. I get the California derangement syndrome. I've been living with that for years and years. New scum. The same 7th grade. I remember the guy on Baltimore Avenue that called me new scum. I was in 7th grade. I can handle that. We'll leave that aside. I understand what they're trying to do. I want to work with them. It's not about me. It's about people that we both represent. He represents and I represent. And I'm honored and proud to represent these folks. And I desperately plead with them. Come out here. help us, and we will help you. You'll be elevated, Mr. President. At the end of the day, you'll be the one we all will go to and say, thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for living up to the values of this country. Thank you for having the backs of these families and these kids. I met a kid the other day, literally was driving away. Their house was on fire in the Palisades, and the young daughter said, Daddy, did you get my bunny? And he said, I didn't get your bunny. I got 4 kids. That's what I hope that President of the United States, President Trump, has an opportunity to meet with that family.
And Jen Psaki, host of Inside with Jen Psaki here on MSNBC, joins me now. Jen, great interview today.
Hi, Chris.
Let's talk first about just your sense of right now. So there's sort of 2 stages, right? Like, they got to get the fires under control, and it is very difficult, if not impossible, with the winds going as they are. What your understanding from the interview is about how feasible that is, and if there's a time frame they can even put on it.
Well, we talked about that a little bit in the interview, too, Chris. As you mentioned earlier, there is an expectation of increased winds overnight. We talked about the preparations they're putting in place for that. He has what he needs in preparation for that. But there are 2 stages right now. There is dealing with the weather and Mother Nature, and then there is also planning for the recovery and the rebuilding, which is happening at the same time. There's 100,000 people who have lost their homes, people who have lost their schools, lost their churches, lost there's also predatory behavior that's happening out there that he's learned from people in the community as well. So these are all of the things he's navigating. We talked about all of them. It is also happening at the same time where you're dealing with the worst wildfires in American history, and he's dealing with the worst disinformation space happening at the same time. And Republicans in Washington who want to condition aid and push this disinformation. So these are all the challenges that he is facing. I've interviewed him a number of times. I know you have too. I've never seen him as emotional and as distressed as he is in this moment, for good reason, for understandable reason. But it is whack-a-mole in trying to get information out to the people in the state, the people who are impacted by these fires, because of forces like the incoming president and his best friend Elon Musk, who are working on the other side.
The thing I've talked to a bunch of people in California, of course, like we all have, everyone I think is 1 degree at most removed from this in many respects. So many people's lives have been touched. Aside from the profound loss at the deep emotional level of like losing your home, there's also then just the sheer hassle that you are staring down. And this is a state that has underproduced housing for a long time, where housing supply has been constrained. You've got stories of Zillow prices being jacked through the roof. You've now got, 1,600 households that are all now looking to rent at the same time. Like, any sense of how you essentially deal with that from a governmental perspective?
Well, they're going to need tens of billions of dollars, is what he said. They don't have an exact number. There's been a lot of numbers thrown out there. President Biden said tens of billions. Some have suggested 50 billion. They don't know exactly yet, right? Because they're doing a survey of the damage without knowing the full extent of the damage. And then there's this question of home insurance, which, as you know, has been a long, challenging issue in the state of California. Major insurers pulled out of insuring homes in California. They have a program in California, but is that going to have enough funding to cover the cost of what everybody needs? And how long is that going to take? And it's going to take months and months and months even to clear the debris and clear the damage. The other tough question I know you've talked about, Chris, and I talked with the governor about are there tough conversations that need to happen about where you can rebuild, which is difficult. Some of these communities have tremendous, Altadena is one of them, histories, right? And is there going to need to be, in addition to the funding, a response from the federal government that is like in the years after Katrina, which we talked about as well, which is rebuilding the infrastructure and the waterways and making sure that it's safe to build upon. So those are all of the challenges, and that's the stage after containment, after these fires are stopped. Those are all things that he and the government are certainly contemplating at this point in time.
Did you get a sense quickly, just in the last minute here, of how much the sort of national conversation matters there, or is it just such a different situation on the ground that, like, the nonsense on cable news doesn't penetrate?
I mean, by nonsense, do you mean the suggestion that aid should be conditioned and that they don't deserve assistance, that kind of nonsense, that kind of stuff? I think what we talked about a bit also was the role of somebody like Elon Musk, who had to, firefighters had to explain to him what the facts on the ground are. That's what they're dealing with. So it doesn't feel good. And we talked about this, too. When you've lost your home, you've lost your school, you've lost your church, your place of worship, and you are dealing with absurd political debates when that has never historically been the case. I mean, Louisiana is a place where, and he talked about this, he was proud to support funding after Hurricane Katrina. Mike Johnson is a person who's saying aid should be conditioned.